Hello, history lovers, and welcome back to the channel. We often think of the Middle Ages as a time of knights, castles, and chivalry, but there's a darker side to this era, a side so bizarre and unsettling it sounds like something out of a horror movie. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most grotesque and surreal events in all of history, the Cadaver Synod. This is the true story of when the Catholic Church dug up the corpse of a dead pope, propped him up on a throne, and put him on trial. Yes, you heard that correctly. A dead man, judged by the living. How could something so macabre even happen? What could a deceased pontiff possibly have done to warrant such a posthumous spectacle of vengeance? Buckle up, because this story reveals the shocking depths of political ambition, rivalry, and paranoia that gripped Rome in the 9th century. This isn't just a quirky historical footnote. It's a chilling reminder that when power is at stake, not even the grave can offer sanctuary. To understand the Cadaver Synod, we first need to meet our two main players, Pope Formosus, the man who would become the star defendant, and Pope Stephen VI, his bitter accuser. Our story begins in the late 9th century, a period of intense political turmoil in Italy. The old Carolingian Empire, founded by Charlemagne, was crumbling. Various noble factions were locked in a ruthless power struggle, each vying for control of the Italian peninsula and, crucially, the imperial crown. And at the center of this web of intrigue was the papacy. The Pope wasn't just a spiritual leader, he was a kingmaker. The man who sat on the throne of St. Peter had the authority to crown the Holy Roman Emperor, a title that came with immense power and prestige. Pope Formosus, before his papacy, was a brilliant and ambitious cardinal bishop. He was known for his successful missionary work, particularly in Bulgaria. However, his rising influence made powerful enemies in Rome. He was even excommunicated at one point by a rival pope, John VIII, on accusations of conspiring against the papacy and abandoning his diocese. Though he was later reinstated, these charges would come back to haunt him, quite literally. When Formosus was finally elected pope in 891, he found himself navigating a political minefield. The main contenders for the imperial crown were two powerful nobles, Guy III of Spoleto and Arnulf of Carinthia, a German king. Formosus was under immense pressure from the Spoletan faction and reluctantly crowned Guy III, and later his son, Lambert, as co-emperors. But secretly, Formosus distrusted the Spoletans and saw them as tyrants. He believed the only way to save Rome from their grip was to bring in an outside force. So, he sent a secret message to Arnulf of Carinthia, urging him to invade Italy and liberate Rome. Arnulf answered the call. He marched his army south, took Rome, and in 896, Pope Formosus crowned him as the new Holy Roman Emperor. For Formosus, it was a political masterstroke. He had freed the papacy from the clutches of a local dynasty and allied it with a powerful Germanic ruler. But his triumph would be short-lived. Just a few months after crowning Arnulf, Pope Formosus died, seemingly of a stroke. And shortly after that, his protector, Emperor Arnulf, also fell ill and had to retreat back to Germany, leaving a massive power vacuum in Rome. With Formosus dead and Arnulf gone, the Spoletan faction, led by Guy's widow Agiltrude and her son Lambert, stormed back into the city, burning with a desire for revenge. They couldn't punish Formosus. He was already dead. Or could they? This is where the story takes its truly ghoulish turn. The Spoletans installed their own man on the papal throne, Pope Stephen VI, and Stephen, driven by a combination of political pressure from the Spoletans and his own personal animosity towards his predecessor, decided to do the unthinkable. He ordered that the body of Pope Formosus, who had been buried for 9 months, be exhumed from his papal crypt. Imagine the scene. In the cold January of 897, gravediggers descended into the hallowed tombs of St. Peter's Basilica. They broke open the sarcophagus of Pope Formosus and pulled out his decaying corpse. The body was then dressed in full pontifical vestments. The silken robes, the pallium, the mitre, the symbols of the very office he was about to be stripped of. They carried the lifeless, rotting body to the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the Cathedral of Rome, and propped it up on a throne in the center of a packed synod of bishops and cardinals. The air would have been thick with the stench of death and the electric tension of a political show trial. Pope Stephen VI presided, his face a mask of fury as he leveled charges against the silent, decaying figure before him. The corpse of Formosus was accused of perjury, of illegally ascending to the papacy from a lesser bishopric, and of violating canon law, the very same charges that had been leveled against him years earlier and for which he had been forgiven. It was a kangaroo court of the highest and most horrifying order. The trial itself was a grotesque parody of justice. Since the defendant couldn't speak for himself, a young deacon was appointed to stand beside the corpse and answer the charges on its behalf. Picture this terrified young man, trembling as he tried to formulate defenses for a dead man, while Pope Stephen VI screamed accusations directly at the corpse's face. The assembly of clergy watched, some in silent horror, others perhaps nodding in grim approval, their loyalties bought and paid for by the Spoletan faction. Every question was a rhetorical attack. Why did you, while Bishop of Porto, usurp the universal Roman See in your ambition? Stephen would thunder at the corpse. The poor deacon could only stammer out feeble replies, his voice swallowed by the sheer insanity of the proceedings. The verdict was, of course, a foregone conclusion. The synod declared Formosus guilty on all charges. His papacy was retroactively nullified. All of his acts, his ordinations, his decrees were declared invalid. This threw the entire church into chaos, as priests and bishops ordained by Formosus suddenly found their positions illegitimate. But the vengeance was not yet complete. The punishment had to be as theatrical as the trial. Stephen VI, in a fit of rage, ordered his guards to strip the papal vestments from the corpse. Then he walked over to the body and personally took a knife to its right hand. He hacked off the 3 fingers that Formosus had used to give blessings and perform ordinations, a symbolic mutilation meant to erase his very essence as a pope. The desecrated body was then dragged through the streets of Rome, a spectacle for the horrified populace before being thrown unceremoniously into the Tiber River. It was the ultimate act of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Stephen and the Spoletans wanted to erase Formosus from history itself. They wanted to send a message to their enemies. This is what happens when you cross us. Not even death will protect you. The story doesn't end there. The people of Rome were disgusted and terrified by the Cadaver Synod. It was seen as a profound sacrilege, an offense against God and man. The city was already unstable, and this macabre event pushed it over the edge. Not long after the trial, a powerful earthquake struck Rome, damaging the Basilica of St. John Lateran, where the synod had been held. Many saw it as a sign of divine wrath, God's judgment upon Stephen VI for his blasphemous act. Public opinion turned violently against him. The Roman populace rose up, seized Stephen VI, and threw him into prison. In the summer of 897, less than a year after the synod, he was strangled to death in his cell. The pendulum of power had swung back once more. What became of Formosus's body? A few monks reportedly found the corpse washed up on the banks of the Tiber and gave it a secret burial. After Stephen's death, the next pope, Theodore II, held his own synod. He annulled the proceedings of the Cadaver Synod, rehabilitated Formosus's memory, and had his body, now recovered, reinterred in St. Peter's Basilica with full papal honors. But the chaos continued. The pope after that, Sergius III, who had been a participant in the Cadaver Synod, came to power a few years later. He reconfirmed the convictions against Formosus, redeclared his papacy invalid, and once again plunged the church into turmoil. For decades, the papacy was caught in this bizarre cycle of validating and invalidating Formosus, depending on which political faction was in control. This entire dark chapter of papal history is now known as the Saculum Obscurum, or the Dark Age of the Papacy. The Cadaver Synod stands as one of history's most powerful warnings about the corrupting nature of absolute power and the dangers of mixing politics with faith. It wasn't about theology or canon law. It was about raw, brutal, political revenge. It showed how an institution dedicated to spiritual salvation could be hijacked for personal vendettas, turning its sacred rituals into instruments of terror. It's a story that feels almost too strange to be true. Yet it is a stark reminder that the past is often far darker and more bizarre than we can imagine. When power becomes paranoia and justice becomes a weapon, not even the dead are safe. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into one of history's darkest moments. If you found this story as fascinating and disturbing as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the strange and forgotten corners of the past. Let me know in the comments what you think about the Cadaver Synod. Was it the craziest trial in history? Until next time, stay curious.